In the shadows of history lie the stories never told. This is Untold Text.
The arsenal of democracy, the narrative of World War II, is often framed by the flash of gunfire, but the article argues that the true foundation of the Allied victory was a blueprint of American industrial might before the United States officially entered the conflict in December 1941. It was already functioning as the silent engine of the war effort. Through the Lend-Lease Act, the U.S. funneled billions of dollars in food, fuel, and material to the United Kingdom, the Soviet Union, and China. A significant credit gap exists regarding this aid. In the Soviet Union, the scale of American logistical support, including 400,000 jeeps, 12,000 armored vehicles, and 2,000 locomotives, was systematically downplayed by Stalin's regime, while the Red Army endured the greatest loss of life. Those soldiers were often sustained by American Tushonka canned meat and transported by American trucks. Post-war Soviet historiography stole this narrative, reframing the victory as a purely communist achievement and erasing the American industrial backbone that kept their front lines moving. Intelligence and the Enigma conflict. One of the most sensitive areas of disputed credit lies in cryptanalysis. For decades, the breaking of the German Enigma code was attributed almost exclusively to Alan Turing and Bletchley Park. However, the article notes that American engineers and cryptanalysts refined and scaled these efforts through the development of bombs and early computing precursors. Without American industrial scaling, the British could not have sustained the intelligence effort alone. In the Pacific, the U.S. Navy's successes, such as the Battle of Midway, were entirely American achievements. Despite this, post-war British accounts often positioned the UK as the masters of signals intelligence, relegating the U.S. to the role of junior partners in a field where America was actually pioneering computer-driven analysis. The Normandy narrative and tactical friction. The invasion of Normandy D-Day serves as a primary example of the intellectual property of victory being contested. While General Dwight D. Eisenhower held supreme command, British Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery frequently claimed the tactical genius of the Overlord plan was his own. The friction here centers on military philosophy. The American view: the war was won through the pioneered doctrines of overwhelming force and mobile warfare. The British view: Americans were brave but green amateurs who succeeded through brute numerical strength rather than refined European strategy. This clumsy giant myth persisted in European history books, suggesting that any U.S. victory was simply a result of having more tanks than Germany had shells, thereby diminishing American tactical innovation. The technological tug-of-war. The article highlights a cycle of mutual appropriation regarding high technology. 1. The Manhattan Project. While an American-led initiative, it relied on the British mission and the Maud Report. Post-war, the UK framed the atomic bomb as a joint invention, despite the U.S. providing 90% of the funding, labor, and infrastructure. 2. The Jet Age. Conversely, the U.S. is often accused of stealing the Whittle jet engine. However, the article argues that, without American metallurgy and General Electric's industrial application, the jet engine, would have remained an experimental curiosity rather than a reliable tool of combat. 3. Mission 1940. This was a literal handover of a black box of British secrets, including the cavity magnetron, the heart of radar. The British claim they provided the brains, while Americans claim that a blueprint is not a weapon. American genius lay in mass producing and miniaturizing the technology for real-world use. The Pacific Theater, the forgotten war. The Pacific War was overwhelmingly an American endeavor, characterized by the brutal island-hopping campaigns. However, as the war neared its end, the British Empire made a concerted effort to re-enter the fray. American commanders, particularly General Douglas MacArthur, viewed this as an attempt to steal the curtain call to restore British imperial prestige in the East. MacArthur famously resisted British or Soviet interference in the occupation of Japan to ensure the credit for the victory remained with the American lives spent to achieve it. VI, the Mediterranean sideline, and the proximity fuse. In North Africa and Italy, the British narrative solidified early. The Americans were the muscle, while the British were the brains. This was reinforced by the U.S. defeat at Kasserine, which the British used to frame American troops as tactically inferior. Furthermore, the article points to the proximity fuse, an American invention, as vital as the atomic bomb. It required the mass production of vacuum tubes that could survive being fired from a cannon. After the war, this was rebranded as a standard Allied development, stripping American labs of the singular credit for one of the war's greatest force multipliers, the Hollywood counter theft and economic erasure. The 1990s saw a cultural reversal. Films like Saving Private Ryan and U-571 created a narrative of an exclusively American triumph. U-571 specifically depicted Americans capturing an Enigma machine, an event that actually involved the Royal Navy before the U.S. entered the war. This sparked a UK backlash, but the article posits this was merely a cultural reaction to decades of European textbooks downplaying the U.S. as the factory beyond the battlefield. The Bretton Woods Agreement, the design of the modern global financial system, is an American achievement often erased from the heroic narrative of the war. Similarly, the Marshall Plan allowed European nations to rebuild their identities. France, under Charles de Gaulle, worked to steal the narrative of its own liberation, downplaying the fact that the French resistance would have been a footnote without the U.S. First and Third Armies. The architecture. The article concludes that theft in history is often a matter of perspective. The Briton sees a latecomer who arrived with the bill. The Russian sees a capitalist who watched from afar. The American sees a world they alone had the resources to save. Ultimately, while other nations may claim specific battles or initial ideas, the architecture of the modern world, including GPS precursors, the Jet Age, and global logistical interconnectedness, remains indelibly stamped. Made in the USA. The American achievement wasn't just firing the last shot, it was the framework for the 20th century.